this video will be starting with Phillip's curve and natural rate of unemployment. Now, Phillip's curve is basically distributed in two types or two forms. Number one is original form and the second one is modified form. Now, this modified is further distributed in two types. First is expected inflation and UN. Okay, we'll talk about everything precisely later on, but first we need to understand this one derivation. Well, we know P is equal to wage 1 plus mu and W is equal to PE FUZ. Also that we are aware about the negative relation between U and W, and positive relation between Z and W, so yes. Now we may write this in a equation form, right? Like this: 1 plus Z minus alpha U. Okay, you need to remember this value, and the very easy trick of remembering it is this 1 plus Z because it has a positive relation, right? Then minus because it has a negative relation, and then we have alpha over here because it is going to measure the magnitude of difference. The difference that is being created due to unemployment on your wage, right? So 1 plus Z minus magnitude of unemployment. It measures effect of unemployment on wage. So yes. So now if we substitute this value, now W is equal to PE 1 plus Z minus alpha U, right? Now if we substitute this value over here, we will get P 1 plus Z minus alpha U PE 1 plus mu, right? For now, this is what you have to keep in mind in order to derive any formula from Phillip's curve. Also, that now you have to replace the value of P with inflation, which is pi. Now it is pi is equal to pi plus mu plus Z minus alpha U. Right? Now you may wonder that how are these two equations equal? Well, this is not equal. It cannot be equal according to your mathematical equation. You cannot derive it anyway. But this is based upon the assumption, economic approximations. Okay. Now another easy way of remembering it is, P is equal to 1 plus Z minus alpha U PE 1 plus mu, right? All you have to do is eliminate 1. Okay, it's not actually the process of doing this, but it is just for you to understand or basically remember the formula. So all you have to do is to substitute P with inflation. Okay, because change in price is equal to inflation, so you can relate the terms, right? So pi is equal to pi E, which is PE, plus mu and Z, so mu plus Z minus alpha U. So yes, this is a very important formula that you are supposed to remember, because further we'll only be using this formula in order to derive formulas of Phillip's curve. Okay, so keeping that in mind, we'll move ahead. Yeah. So again, the formula that we just noted down was pi is equal to pi E plus mu plus Z minus alpha U, right? So if your expected inflation increases, then your inflation will automatically increase, keeping other factors constant. if your z increases, okay, if your mu increases and z increases, keeping other factors constant, then again your inflation will increase, right? And if your u increases, right, then your inflation will decrease due to this negative relation, keeping other factors constant. So yes, this is the implication of this formula. Now we can move ahead with our Phillip's curve ka different types. Phillip's curve, again, you have original form and modified form. Yes, so basically your original form was derived before 1960s, okay? Before 1960s, there was no concept of expected inflation or natural rate of unemployment, okay? So what happened was, आपका inflation used to fluctuate, positive, negative, okay? It only was either positive or negative. So if we take an average, then average inflation was usually 0, which means there was no expected inflation in the economy. So automatically this was equal to 0. Now putting this thing in our equation, which is, I'm going to write this formula every time so that you are able to memorize it, okay? Plus mu plus z is alpha u, right? So now we see that this is 0, so we can eliminate it. So it is, okay, and this is the form that we used in Phillip's curve original form, which was used before 1960s, okay? Now when I was talking about modified form, I mentioned that we basically have two types over here. First is expected inflation and another is national rate of unemployment. So let this be the first form and let this be the second form. So first let's talk about expected inflation. What happened after 1960s, economists started to see the trend that your inflation was rising, right? Inflation started to rise. It was rising and was positive throughout. Okay? So what happened? Now your average inflation has to be some positive value, right? So now basically you cannot assume the fact that your pi e, or which is expected inflation, is 0. So it's not equal to 0. Now it has some positive value. Now talking about the positive value, what economists decided was, let's assume it to be the inflation of previous year, okay? Which means, for example, I'm in 2011 right now, and in order to make prediction about 2010, I don't know about it, so let it be x. 2010 was 6%. So I know that it is increasing constantly, right? And there has to be some positive value, but I'm not sure what exactly it is. So economists started to believe that, okay, 2011 ka inflation rate, let's take or supposed to be 6%. So what economists started to do was to assume expected inflation of current year to be the inflation of previous year, okay? So this is what we got. Now if we put that in our previous equation, which is then we may write it as theta t minus 1, which is this is t, plus u plus z minus, it's z not 2, yeah, okay? Now let this theta be 1, okay? So we have right over here. So now if we bring this over on our left hand side, so we may get right? Now I'll explain what is the similarity and difference between modified one and our original form. Now see, this inflation in our original form, we assume that inflation can only change when there is change in unemployment rate. Okay? Inflation can only change when there's change in U. This was given in the original form. But now we have change in inflation can only be due to change in your unemployment rate. This was change in inflation and this was simply your inflation. Okay? Now what is the difference between change in inflation and inflation? This is your inflation and this is change in inflation. This is alpha pi t. This is pi t minus 1. It is inflation of 22, year 22, and this is the change in inflation that happened from the year 22 and 21. So definitely there has to be some difference. For example, inflation in 2022 is say 3%. I'm just taking some random value, and 21 was suppose 5%, right? So this is 3%, and this change in inflation is minus 2%, which means inflation has declined by 2%, right? So this is the difference between your modified one and original form, right? Now coming to our modified 2, which is unemployment, natural rate of unemployment. Now in a modified 3 form, let me change the color first. Yeah, in a modified 2 form, we have a new concept of natural rate of unemployment. Now you have to remember this sequence, which is whenever P is equal to PE, that we've done probably in second or third video. Whenever P is equal to PE, your U is equal to UN, and whenever U is equal to UN, your inflation is equal to expected inflation, right? These three people come hand in hand. Okay, whenever P is equal to P, U is equal to UN, and inflation is equal to expected inflation. So again, coming to our previous formula, which is, let this be expected plus mu plus z minus expected unemployment. Okay, now if we move this on our left hand side, we have minus this, right? We know inflation is equal to expected inflation, so is equal to 0. So 0 is equal to mu plus z minus u. Now we have, if we take this guy on our left hand side, we have is equal to this, and u is equal to mu plus z by alpha, which is equal to un. Okay, now remember this. Okay, u, why? Because u is equal to un. Okay, so u is equal to un, which is equal to mu plus z by alpha, right? Now again we are going to write down our previous formula, which was pi is equal to pi e plus mu plus z minus alpha u, right? So if we take expected inflation on our left hand side, we are left with this, right? Now we are going to also, we know this is equal to un, is equal to u. Now if I introduce a term alpha minus alpha u minus mu plus z by alpha. Tell me, is there any difference in these two? Apparently not, because minus minus plus, so you'll get mu plus z by alpha into alpha minus alpha u. It's just same as the above. So, but now why do we do this? Because we know mu plus z by alpha is our natural rate of unemployment. So we have equal to minus alpha u minus un. And this equation that you see here is the most important equation of Phillip's curve. Right? Easy to understand? Yes, so this is what you have basically you're supposed to remember. Now just to summarize the entire thing, in Phillip's curve we had two forms: original before 60s, modified after 60s, right? Modified is got expected inflation and natural rate of unemployment. Now the form that you were supposed to remember from the very beginning was pi is equal to pi e plus mu plus z minus alpha u, right? Now in original form we assume that the expected inflation is 0 due to fluctuations and average being 0. So the form that we used here was inflation is equal to mu plus z minus alpha u, right? When we talk about modifications, we have this case when we were introduced the concept of expected inflation. Why? Because our inflation was constantly increasing positively. So now we started to assume that okay, we have some value here. So in order to assume a value, we started to consider expected inflation to be theta t minus 1. So what happened? T minus 1 is equal to the z minus u, right? And in the second modification where natural rate of unemployment was introduced, just a second, you can take screenshot of these. Yeah. And the third was when we introduced the case of natural rate of unemployment, where we started to assume that our u is equal to un, which makes p is equal to pe, which is equal to alpha e, right? So u is equal to mu plus z by alpha, right? So inflation t minus t minus 1 is equal to minus alpha u minus un. I have explained the derivation earlier, so you can move back if you do not remember that. So yes, here we have the three very important formulas from Phillip's curve, and you are basically required to remember this one. Okay, so thank you.